Today then, dear friends, it's the third Sunday after the Epiphany. And the Epistle is taken from Romans chapter 12. Brethren, be not wise in your own conceits. To no man render evil for evil, but provide good things, not only in the sight of God, but also in the sight of all men. And if it be possible, as far as lies in you, be at peace with all men. Do not avenge yourselves, beloved, but give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But if thy enemy is hungry, give him food. If he be thirsty, give him drink. For by so doing thou wilt heap coals of fire upon his head. Be not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. You can stand for the Holy Gospel, which is taken from St. Matthew chapter 8. At that time, when Jesus had come down from the mountains, a great crowd followed him. And behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And stretching forth his hand, Jesus touched him, saying, I will, be thou made clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see thou tell no one, but go show thyself to the priests, and offer the gift that Moses commanded, for a witness to them. Now when he had come into Capernaum, there came to him a centurion who entreated him, saying, Lord, my servant is lying sick in the house, paralyzed, and is grievously afflicted. And Jesus said to him, I will come and cure him. But in answer the centurion said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldst enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man subject to authority, and have soldiers subject to me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. And when Jesus heard this, he marveled, and said to those who were following him, amen, I say to you, I have not found so great faith in Israel. And I tell you that many will come from the east and from the west, and will feast with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom will be put forth into the darkness outside. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the centurion, go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done to thee. And the servant was healed at that hour. Thus far the words of the Holy Gospel. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Dear Father and sisters, dear faithful, I wanted to begin in this sermon a series of sermons at the start of this year. The year's still young, right? 2022. But I wanted to preach some sermons on the Mass of all time. As I look into the pews this morning, I see three or so, I can say three, generations of traditional Catholics. There's the old guard, those who were brought up for Vatican II Council. Some of you were even in school when Rome changed the Mass. Then there's the second generation of traditional Catholics, which you might say it's the young parents, the hardworking mom and dads. It's the many of us priests and sisters who were no doubt formed post-Vatican II. We remember driving hours to attend Sunday Mass. We remember attending Mass in basements in hotels, and even schools and flea markets, we hear. These were the days, you might say, that the traditional movement was very young, the second generation. 25 years ago, the district that we have, the SSPX in the U.S. district, didn't even have half the priests that we currently have. And we could only have dreamt back then of building a seminary in Virginia, or building a beautiful church like the Immaculata that's being built in St. Mary's, Kansas. All over we see the youth growing in tradition. All over. This is the third generation of traditional Catholics, which in this movement, which by the grace of God, by the hard work of many priests, nuns, and good parents, we have moved, you might say, from the catacombs of the basements to the light of real churches and schools. But one thing that we should all ask is this question, which this morning I present to you, which we approach this question with even fear and trembling. And it's this: will we pass on the love of the faith? Will we pass on the love of the faith of our fathers? The love of the Mass of all time? If you go to Icon, Switzerland, there where our Father Hogan studied for the priesthood, you will see the tomb of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. On the front of his tomb is written the words Tradidi quod et accepit, which in Latin means, I have handed on what I have received. You know, this should be our prayer. This should be our aim in life, to hand on the eternal gift of our faith, which is so beautifully expressed in this Tridentine Mass. I don't normally do this, but I wanted to encourage some books from the pulpit. This might look like a commercial, but it's not. The first book here it's called The Mass of All Time, put out by the Angelus Press. It is a compilation of the writings and sermons and spiritual conferences of Archbishop Lefebvre. It is a good read. In the book you read and you see that this man loved, a profound love for this Holy Mass, and an incredible knowledge of the sacred mysteries. The second book I wanted to kind of hold up and recommend is this book. It's a little one, by Dom Guéranger, and it's called The Holy Mass. Dom Guéranger was a holy Benedictine priest who lived in the 1800s. He was known because he reopened the famous monastery of Salem, which had fallen into ruin. And he began a liturgical revival that would be felt all over the world. Dom Guéranger. And so now to the question, dear friends, that we can ask is, why do we look at the Mass, Father? Why all these sermons? Why do we have to look at the Mass so deeply? Isn't the Mass just another devotion? There's many devotions I have, Father. All of them will get me to heaven, correct? But dear friends, first of all grace and all devotions, they flow from the Mass. Because all graces and all devotions flow from the cross of our Savior. And you see, this Mass and the cross, they go hand in hand. You can never separate the two. You want one, you get the other. The Holy Mass and the Holy Cross. And that is why we traditional Catholics have refused to surrender this Mass. Because if we do, we know that eventually we will surrender the cross. And without the cross, there's no redemption. And without redemption, there's no salvation. And this is why in 1970, the history, Archbishop Lefebvre received permission from Rome. He received permission from Rome to begin the work of the SSPX. They said it would be an experiment of tradition. And that is also why in 1976, only 6 years later, the same Archbishop Lefebvre will be suspended in his priesthood, publicly, forbidden publicly to offer Mass and give sacraments. What happened in 6 years? And it will be this same Archbishop that in 1988 will carry through and consecrate 4 men to be bishops. 4 of our priests became bishops in 1988. Why? Because the very existence of tradition was being threatened. That's why. They were taking this Mass away. And it will be for this reason that he and the other bishops will be excommunicated. And the papal decree issued from Pope John Paul II, the followers of the SSPX and of tradition were warned, do not follow Lefebvre. If you follow Lefebvre, the Pope said, you will go into schism, all of you. Oh, my dear friends, thank goodness that old traditional Catholic guard did not listen to the Pope. And they have not gone into schism. These were our grandfathers and our grandmothers. These were old priests who were thrown out of their dioceses because they loved the Mass. Some of them barely had enough money to get by. You read the story of Father Normandin in Canada. He was nicknamed the pastor out in the cold. And there's a book written by the Angelus Press called The Pastor Out in the Cold, about his life. You see, the truth is that the founders of this movement, of this traditional Catholic movement, they were condemned by the Roman authorities. And so if we have the Holy Mass, if we have these churches and schools, it is no doubt due to the heroic efforts of those unwavering fighters that came before us. In the preface of that book, Pastor Out in the Cold, Archbishop Lefebvre wrote the preface, He dates it 1975, 1 year before his suspension. And in the preface he says, quote, "If we receive canonical penalties from the Roman authorities because of our loyalty to the traditional Roman Mass, these penalties are null and void, and priests should be encouraged with greater courage to continue the good fight for the faith." So now, dear friends, let us begin looking at the Mass, this eternal treasure, this gift of all gifts. As Cardinal Newman says, the most beautiful thing this side of heaven. In World War I, in France, it was the bloody Battle of Verdun, which lasted 10 long months. It was the year 1916. The French finally held off the Germans, their bombardment. For 10 long months, this Battle of Verdun occurred, which resulted in the complete destruction of this once beautiful city. Even the cathedral was destroyed from the German bombings. The walls of the cathedral were blown out. The roof was gone. The stained glass windows were all shattered. However, standing fixed in its rightful place was the high altar. Yes, the altar of God will always remain. And this is why we should love our altar. Because in the midst of this changing world, the altar teaches us of the eternal truths that will never change. That is why we must adorn the altar with our very best. And that is why we wake up early in the morning to go to attend Mass at this altar. And dear friends, if you can't attend Mass every morning because of your job or family, then at least in your morning offering, unite all of your actions of the day with the Masses being offered here at this altar and all throughout the world. From the earliest history of mankind, men have offered sacrifice to God. They've built altars. To recognize why? 3 things. Why do you offer sacrifice to God? To show God's supreme dominion, number 1. Number 2, for gratitude for all that He has given you. And number 3, to pay back something to your Creator. We see this with the sacrifices even going back to Cain and Abel. They felt this instinct to offer sacrifice. Look at Noah when he came off the ark. The first thing he does is he builds an altar to the Lord. It says in Genesis 8:20, Noah built an altar before the Lord, and taking cattle and fowl that were clean, he offered a holocaust on that altar. Why do men burn things? Why do men like fire? I tell the boys. I remember the Bishop Fillet joking with the little ones in the sacristy after we did a consecration of an altar in a church in Kentucky. The bishop lights a fire on the altar during the consecration. The boys, wow. And we got into the sacristy and the bishop said, all you boys now want to become bishops so you can play with fire. Why do we want fire, the men? To offer sacrifice. Because when you destroy something by fire, only God can restore it. It gives everything to Him. We also see in the history of the book of Genesis how Abraham's brother Lot, when he was invaded by the foreign kings, Abraham came and defeated those kings. And immediately after the battle, he is met by Melchizedek, a priest of the Lord, and he offers a sacrifice of bread and wine. In the victory over the foreign kings, it's a symbol of Christ's victory over the powers of hell. And of course, the bread and wine, centuries before, was a symbol of this great sacrifice of the Mass. So my dear friends, then, I just wanted to review with you a few things about the altar in this first series of the Sermon on the Mass of All Time, so that we might know why the altar is the way it is. And all the rubrics and all the precisions. Holy Mother Church is so careful to tell us what the altar must be like. First of all, it must be made of stone. Under the altar, there must be a support column that goes into the earth to show that this altar represents Christ, who is the chief cornerstone. You see, He is the center. He is the foundation stone of our lives, of our entire religion. Now, if the altar is made of wood, like this altar here, the altar is made of wood, then the bishop cannot consecrate the entire altar. However, there is an altar stone in the very middle. If you were to come up here and look under the cloth, you would see an altar stone. And that altar stone is consecrated by the bishop, so that we say Mass on a stone, always on a stone. The altar must be consecrated in a very solemn manner. I was just referring to that ceremony where the bishop will bless salt and ash and wine and water, and he'll mingle it together in a paste. And then he'll go to the altar where there's 5 little crosses, 2 on each side and 1 in the middle. This is on altar stone. The altar is entirely made of stone. And he takes this paste and he puts it into each cross. And of course, those 5 crosses represent the 5 wounds of Christ, through which all grace flows. And so this altar becomes Christ in a sense, as it gives grace to the world. In the stone, in the altar stone, must be at least the relics of 2 martyrs, 2 heroes of heaven. This custom dates back to the early days of the catacombs, where down in the catacombs where our fathers of the faith worshipped, because it was illegal in Rome. There you'll see in the catacombs little niches behind their altars, where they would put the bones of the martyrs. Several times during Mass, the priest bows down. You'll see Father kiss the altar. We are kissing these precious relics. The word altar, it means high. It comes from a Latin word which means high. Why? Because it must be the highest part of the church. It is the altar that faces, we look to the altar, we look to heaven. The altar should face east. I don't know what direction we're facing. I think it's east. I'll go out after Mass with my compass. But the altar should face east, the church says. The reason? Because the sun rises in the east. Because the Son of God is our sun. He is everything to us. The altar is fixed, again, in this changing world. The altar will survive all storms of this world. You know, everyone looks for something that will last the ages, that will never fade and never perish. I can't think of too many things. But there are some altars that will remain until the end of time because they are immovable. And that is why Holy Mother Church is so careful in the regulation of what altars should look like. What about the candles that are on the altar? You know, those candles there, they were used for a practical reason in the catacombs because they had to see. But then there is, of course, the mystical reason of the light. The light that gives light to the darkened world of sin. You're given a candle at the end of your baptism. The Godfather holds your candle. And you are told to go now and shine forth your light. My dear friends, it's the same thing. The flame here represents the light of Christ, the charity that burns in your soul, in the love of your soul. On the altar, there's 3 cloths on this altar. 3 cloths. Of course, there's a practical reason that if Father were to spill the precious blood would be absorbed by 3 cloths. But the mystical reason there is that it represents the 3 members of the church. The militant, the church suffering, the church triumphant. And it represents Christ, of course, because on Holy Thursday the altar is stripped. We strip the altar of all the cloths because Christ was stripped of his garments. The main decoration on every altar must be the crucifix. And here, of course, we have this big cross, the crucifix hanging above the altar. And the reason is, obviously, so that always we see what the Mass essentially is. The Mass is not essentially a meal. The Mass is not essentially meant for the people of God to commune together to whatever. The Mass is essentially a sacrifice. And for that reason, the priest is ordered in the rubric several times during the Mass to look and to glance at the cross. May we all look at the cross. The relics on the altar. We have relics there. Those relics are between the candles burning. Why? The church is teaching you a lesson. If you want to be a saint, you must. It will only be through the Mass. It will only be through the sacrifice. And then, of course, we decorate the altar with flowers. It's an ancient custom. Why? Well, you might say that by their lovely colors, the flowers and their pleasing fragrance, they draw our hearts and they draw our senses to to the altar, they tell us that virtue blossoms best in the presence of our Eucharistic King. The flowers remind us to make our hearts like gardens, so that Christ can walk in your soul, so that Mary can plant seeds of virtue in your soul. So my dear friends, when I end this sermon, St. Pius X, over a century ago now, he told the world that if you want truly Christian action, you must have a true Christian spirit. And if you want a true Christian spirit, you must have a true love of the liturgy. And so from your pews, you can actively participate in the liturgy. And we encourage you to follow along the Mass with your Holy Missal. Back in I was just watching an old video, back in 1936, there was launched a movement in the Diocese of Chicago. It was called Praying the Mass. And the priest was introducing this new custom of praying with the Missal. Because before then, Catholics didn't really have the opportunity of praying with missals. And so now in the Missal, you know, there's the ordinary and there's the propers. The ordinary of the Mass is the same prayers every day at Mass. But then there's the propers, where you mark it with your ribbon, where you read the collect, you read the Epistle and the Gospel, which changes every Sunday, and is always different according to the feast day and the season of the year. So my dear friends, let us remember that we stand for the traditional Catholic movement that was begun when the Mass was changed. And so we must love our Mass. We must always go to the Mass, to never ever give it up, to always think of the altar. Even if I can't go to church, send your guardian angel and tell your guardian angel to pray for you there at the altar, to whisper your name at the sacrifice, so that Christ, from the moment that you die, will be there to embrace you as a friend, as someone that he saw often at the foot of the cross. Dear Blessed Mother, let us always love your divine Son in the Holy Mass. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.